I don't know if anyone's ever going to read this. Hell, I don't even know why I'm writing it. Habit, maybe. Maybe guilt. Maybe I think writing it down will keep it from clawing at my brain all day. My name's Marcus Reed, and 3 weeks ago I inherited property from an uncle I barely remembered, Theodore Reed. I had maybe 2 memories of the guy from when I was 8 or 9. Tall, quiet, smelled like pipe tobacco and motor oil. He'd show up at Christmas sometimes, shake my dad's hand, give me a $5 bill, and disappear again. So when Patricia Hoffman called to tell me he'd left me a cabin in Montana, I figured it was some falling down shack I'd have to pay someone to haul away. "It's about 40 miles northeast of Kalispell," she said. Her voice had that crisp lawyer tone that made everything sound like a business transaction. "Your uncle was very specific about the transfer. No conditions, no strings. It's yours free and clear." She mailed me a hand-drawn map, not some GPS coordinates or a proper address, just a pencil sketch on notebook paper showing dirt roads and landmarks. Turn left at the lightning-struck pine. Follow the creek for 2 miles. Look for the blue mailbox. I should have known then that Theodore wasn't the type for normal. The rental car bounced down the dirt road like it was trying to shake its own wheels off. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes since I left the main highway, following that hand-drawn map and hoping I hadn't missed a turn. The trees pressed in close on both sides, pine and fir mostly, thick enough that I couldn't see more than 30 feet into the woods. Then the road curved left around a massive boulder, and there it was. The cabin sat in a small clearing, maybe 50 yards back from where I'd parked. Single-story, log construction with a green metal roof that had seen better decades. A covered porch ran across the front, and I could see a stone chimney poking up from the back end. It looked solid enough. Lived in. A rusted pickup truck sat beside the cabin. Ford, probably from the 80s, with Montana plates and a layer of pine needles on the hood thick enough to plant a garden in. I sat in the rental car for a minute, engine ticking as it cooled. The quiet out here was different from city quiet. Not empty, full of small sounds I couldn't identify. Rustling in the trees, something that might have been a bird call. The kind of quiet that made you aware of your own breathing. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and walked up to the porch. The front door was painted dark green, with a brass handle that turned when I tried it, unlocked. The inside smelled like dust and old wood and something else I couldn't place, something organic. The main room was bigger than it looked from outside. Kitchen area along the left wall, stone fireplace on the right, a couple of chairs and a couch that had probably been brown once upon a time. Everything was clean but felt like it had been waiting. That's when I saw the envelope. It sat on the wooden table in the center of the room, yellowed with age, and my name written across the front in careful script. Marcus Reed. The handwriting was old-fashioned, the kind they used to teach in schools before everyone started typing everything. I set my bag down and picked up the envelope. The paper felt thin between my fingers, like it might tear if I wasn't careful. Inside were 3 sheets of the same yellowed paper, covered in that same careful handwriting. "Marcus, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and the cabin is yours. I hope you'll forgive an old man for not explaining things properly while I was alive. There are matters here that are difficult to discuss, and I was never good with words when it came to family. This place has been in our family for 63 years. It's a good place, but it requires certain considerations. I've written down some rules that you'll need to follow. They may seem strange, but I ask that you trust me. There are reasons for each one. Welcome home." Theodore below that, in the same careful script, were 6 numbered items. 1. Lock the front door at sunset. Do not open it again until sunrise. 2. Do not look out the front window after dark. 3. There is a second door beside the fireplace. Never open it. 4. If you hear voices calling from the woods at night, do not answer. Do not go outside to investigate. 5. Refill the bird feeder only when the birds are singing in the morning, never at any other time. 6. During storms at night, stay inside no matter what you hear. I read through the list twice, then set the papers down on the table. What the hell, Theodore? I looked around the cabin again, paying attention this time. The bird feeder he'd mentioned hung from a hook outside the kitchen window, a simple wooden thing, mostly empty. The front window was bigger than I'd noticed, taking up most of the wall beside the door, and there, beside the fireplace, was a second door. I'd missed it completely when I first walked in. It was painted the same color as the walls, with no handle that I could see, just a thin vertical line in the wood that might have been a crack if you weren't looking for it. I walked over and ran my fingers along the edge. Definitely a door. I could feel the gap where it would open, but there was no obvious way to open it. I pushed against it. Nothing. Tried to get my fingernails into the crack and pull. Still nothing. The whole thing was ridiculous. A list of rules like I was 12 years old again, staying at some aunt's house where I couldn't touch anything. Don't look out the window. Don't open the door. Don't feed the birds at the wrong time. I crumpled the papers up and tossed them toward the fireplace, but they didn't make it that far. I caught them halfway there, smoothed them out, and set them back on the table. The sun was getting low outside. I could see it through the kitchen window, orange light filtering through the trees. Maybe an hour until sunset. I unpacked my bag, putting clothes in the bedroom dresser and toiletries in the small bathroom. Found coffee in the kitchen cabinets and a pot that looked like it had been there since the Carter administration. The whole time I kept glancing back at those papers on the table. Locked the front door at sunset. I checked my watch. 6:43. The sun was touching the tree line now, painting everything in that golden light you get right before dark. 6:55. I walked to the front door and looked out at the clearing. The rental car sat where I'd left it. The rusted pickup hadn't moved. Everything looked exactly the same as when I'd arrived. 7:02. The sun slipped behind the trees and the clearing went gray. I turned the deadbolt on the front door. The sound was louder than it should have been in the quiet cabin. Just being cautious, I told myself. No harm in locking the door, but my hands were shaking when I did it. I woke to birds chirping outside the kitchen window. The sound was different from what I'd grown up with in the city. Sharper, maybe. More variety. I lay in the narrow bed for a minute, listening to them go at it like they were having some kind of argument in the trees. Then I remembered the feeder rule. I got dressed and walked to the kitchen window. The wooden feeder hung from a metal post about 10 feet from the cabin, swaying a little in the morning breeze. Empty, just like Theodore's letter said it would be. The shed was behind the cabin, a small structure with the same green metal roof. The door stuck when I tried to open it, warped wood scraping against the frame. Inside it smelled like motor oil and old lumber. Garden tools hung from hooks on the walls, and bags of what looked like bird seed sat stacked in the corner. I grabbed one of the bags, sunflower seeds mostly, with some other stuff mixed in. The feeder had a hinged top that opened easy enough. I poured the seed in, listening to it rattle against the wood. Before I'd even finished, a blue jay landed on the edge and started eating. Then another bird, then 5 more. I stood there watching them for a while. They didn't seem to care that I was 10 feet away, just went about their business like I wasn't even there. The next few days fell into a routine. I'd wake up, check the feeder, explore the woods during daylight. Always stayed within sight of the cabin, though. Something about the way the trees seemed to go on forever made me nervous about getting lost. I found a creek about a 1/4 mile north. Clear water running over smooth rocks. Found some old trail markers nailed to trees, faded and weathered but still readable. Found a clearing where someone had built a fire pit years ago, the stones blackened and scattered now. But I always made it back to the cabin before the sun started getting low. Every evening, I'd lock the front door when the light began to fade. I'd make dinner from the canned goods Theodore had left in the pantry. I'd read one of the paperback books from the shelf by the fireplace, old westerns and mysteries with yellowed pages, and I'd avoid looking out the front window after dark. It wasn't hard the first few nights. I kept busy, organized the kitchen cabinets, fixed a loose board on the front porch, wrote in the notebook I'd brought with me. But on the fourth night, something changed. I was sitting at the table reading a book about a detective in Los Angeles when I heard it, a voice drifting through the trees, soft at first, like someone calling from far away, then clearer. "Marcus." I looked up from the book. The voice was coming from outside, somewhere in the direction of the front window. "Marcus, are you there?" It was a woman's voice, melodic, almost singing, like she was calling to a friend. I stood up without thinking about it, took a step toward the front window. "Marcus, I know you can hear me." My hand was reaching for the curtain when I caught myself. Rule number 4. Don't answer voices from the woods at night. I stepped back from the window, sat down hard in the chair. "Please, Marcus, I just want to talk." The voice was closer now, right outside maybe, or maybe that was just how it sounded in the quiet cabin. I opened the book again, tried to focus on the words. The detective was questioning a witness about a murder in a hotel room. I read the same paragraph 3 times. "Marcus, don't ignore me." The voice had changed, still melodic, but with an edge now. Frustrated, I turned a page. The detective found a clue in the victim's coat pocket, a business card with an address written on the back. "Fine, be that way." Then the voice started laughing, not angry laughter. Pleasant, like someone had just heard a good joke. The sound drifted around the cabin, sometimes from the front, sometimes from the sides. I kept reading. The detective drove to the address on the business card. It was a warehouse in a bad part of town. The laughter went on for 20 minutes. Sometimes it would fade away, and I'd think it was over. Then it would come back, closer than before. "I'll wait for you, Marcus. I'm very patient." The voice was pleading now, soft and sad. "Please, I am so lonely out here." I closed the book, walked to the kitchen and made coffee, even though it was past 10 o'clock. The voice followed me, muffled by the walls, but still clear enough to understand. "Just look at me, Marcus. That's all I want. Just look." I sat back down with the coffee and opened the book again. The detective was inside the warehouse now, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The voice kept going for another hour, pleading, then laughing, then singing something I couldn't quite make out, always saying my name, always asking me to come outside, to look, to answer. I read about the detective finding another body in the warehouse. I read about him calling for backup. I read about the killer trying to escape through a window. Finally, the voice stopped. I sat in the silence for a long time, listening. Just the usual night sounds, wind in the trees, something small scurrying around outside. I finished the book. The detective caught the killer. Case closed. But I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I walked to the kitchen window to check the feeder. No birds. I stood there for 5 minutes, waiting. The feeder was still half full from yesterday, but nothing came to eat from it. The trees around the clearing were silent. No bird songs. I remembered the rule. Only refill the feeder when the birds sing in the morning. So I waited. 10 o'clock, 11, noon. Nothing. The forest was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. Like everything that lived out there had just disappeared. I stayed inside all day, paced around the cabin, made lunch, cleaned the bathroom, organized the books on the shelf. The silence pressed against the windows like something physical. I found myself holding my breath, listening for any sound at all. A squirrel, a woodpecker, anything, but there was nothing. I made dinner as the sun started to set. Beans and rice from Theodore's pantry. The scrape of the spoon against the pot was the loudest thing I'd heard all day. I locked the door when the light faded, sat at the table with another book. The silence followed me into the night. I didn't realize how tense I'd gotten until the next morning, when the birds came back. The sound of them singing hit me like a wave. Dozens of voices calling to each other in the trees around the cabin. I stood at the kitchen window, listening to the familiar chorus, and felt my shoulders relax for the first time in 24 hours. I hadn't known I was holding my breath until I could breathe again. I grabbed the bag of birdseed from the shed before I'd even finished my coffee. The birds were back, and that meant I could get outside again. Had to get outside again. The feeder took the seed easy, and I stood there watching a pair of cardinals work at the sunflower seeds. Normal. Everything felt normal again, like the world had remembered how to breathe. I needed to walk. Needed to move after being cooped up in the cabin for a day and a half. The trails called to me the way they always did, and I headed north toward the creek without thinking much about it. The woods felt right again. Birds calling back and forth overhead, squirrels chattering at each other, the soft crunch of pine needles under my boots. I took the long way around, following the old trail markers deeper into the trees than I'd gone before. That's when I saw the first tree. A big pine about 50 yards off the main trail with 4 deep gouges running down the bark. Fresh gouges. The wood underneath was still pale, not weathered gray like old damage would be. I walked closer. The scratches started about 7 feet up the trunk and ran down maybe 3 feet, deep enough that I could stick my finger into them, deep enough that whatever made them had to be strong and tall. I kept walking, but now I was looking at the trees different, checking them. Found another one a quarter-mile down the trail. Same pattern, 4 parallel scratches starting high and running down. This one had bark scattered around the base like it happened recent. Then another and another. By the time I made it back to the cabin, I'd counted 6 trees with fresh marks, all of them on the trails I walked regular. All of them looking like something with claws had been marking territory. My territory. The sun was getting low when I finally came back to the clearing. I stood at the edge of the trees for a minute, looking at the cabin. It looked smaller than it had that morning, more fragile. I went inside and locked the door early. Didn't wait for sunset this time. Dinner was beans from a can and some crackers I found in the pantry. I ate standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the feeder. The birds had cleaned it out pretty good. Normal evening settling in around the cabin. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the shed and moving toward the front of the cabin. I set my fork down and listened. The steps weren't trying to be quiet, but they weren't hurried either, just steady, like someone taking their time, maybe looking around as they walked. The footsteps reached the front corner of the cabin and kept going, moving along the wall toward the side where the kitchen window was. I grabbed the biggest knife from the drawer, stood perfectly still in the middle of the kitchen, listening. The steps passed under the window, kept going around the back of the cabin. I could hear them on the other side of the wall, steady and patient, around the far corner now, along the back wall where the bedroom was, then the side wall where the fireplace was. The footsteps completed the circle and started again. Same pace, same deliberate rhythm. I stood there, gripping that knife, and realized my hands were shaking. Not just my hands. My whole body was trembling like I was cold, but the cabin was warm enough. The footsteps paused, right outside the front door. I held my breath and listened. Nothing for maybe 30 seconds. Then the steps started again, continuing around the cabin like nothing had happened. 3 more times around, each time pausing at the front door for half a minute before moving on. Then silence. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved, set the knife on the counter and walked to the front window. Stood there with my hand on the curtain, wanting to look but remembering the rules. Don't look out the front window after dark. I stepped back and sat down at the table. Picked up one of Theodore's westerns and tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick in my head. The footsteps were gone, but I kept listening for them anyway. I went to bed around 11, climbing up to the loft and laying down on the narrow mattress. From up there, I could see down into the main room, could see the second door beside the fireplace. That's when it started rattling. Gentle at first, like someone was testing the door, seeing if it would give. The sound was small in the quiet cabin, just a soft vibration against the frame. I stared down at it from the loft. The door looked the same as always, just a thin line in the wall where it met the frame, but it was moving, just barely, but moving. The rattling got stronger. Now it sounded like someone was pushing against the door from the other side, pushing hard. The whole frame shook, and I could hear the wood creaking. Then it stopped. Silence for maybe 5 minutes. I started to think it was over. The door exploded into motion, violent shaking that made the whole cabin groan, like something was throwing itself against the other side, desperate to get through. I lay there, staring down at it, too scared to move. The rattling went on for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped sudden as it started. Quiet again, then gentle rattling, like the testing from before. It went on like that all night. Violent shaking, then silence, then gentle testing, then violent shaking again. I didn't sleep, just lay there watching that door try to open itself. By the time the sun came up, everything was quiet. I climbed down from the loft and walked over to the door. Looked the same as always, same thin line in the wall, but when I got close, I could see fresh scratches around the frame, thin lines in the wood like something had been clawing at it from the other side. I made coffee and sat at the table looking at those scratches. Theodore's rules weren't just old man superstition, they were protection against something that wanted in, something that was getting stronger. I made my first mistake on the 8th night. The woman's voice came back around 10 p.m., same as before, calling my name from somewhere near the front of the cabin, but this time she sounded closer, right outside the front window. "Marcus," she said, "I know you're in there." I was sitting at the table with one of Theodore's westerns, trying to focus on cattle rustlers and sheriffs, but her voice cut right through the story. "Marcus, please. Just look at me." I set the book down, told myself to stay put. Theodore's rules were clear. Don't look out the front window after dark. Don't answer voices from the woods. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "I just want to see you." The voice was soft, pleasant, like someone I might know, someone I might trust. "Please, Marcus, just for a second." I stood up, took a step toward the front window. This was stupid. I knew it was stupid. But something about her voice made it hard to think straight, made the rules seem less important. "That's it," she said. "Come closer." I walked to the window. The curtains were drawn, same as every night, but there was a gap where they didn't quite meet in the middle, just a thin line of glass. "I can see you moving in there," she said. "Just pull the curtain back a little." My hand reached for the fabric. I caught myself and pulled it back. "Don't be afraid," she said. "I'm beautiful, Marcus. You'll like what you see." I pressed my face close to the gap, peered through the thin slice of glass. At the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet from the cabin, stood a pale figure. Human-shaped but too far away to make out clearly, white dress or nightgown, long dark hair. She raised one hand and waved. "There you are," she said. Her voice was clearer now, happier. "I knew you'd look." The figure started walking toward the cabin. That's when I saw the movements weren't right. Her legs moved too stiff. Her arms swung wrong, like a puppet with half its strings cut. I stumbled backward from the window, knocked over the chair behind me. "Don't go," she called. "We're just getting acquainted." I scrambled toward the loft ladder, climbed up fast and pressed myself against the far wall. Something reached the front door, started scratching, long, deliberate scrapes against the wood, like fingernails but heavier, deeper. The scratching went on for hours. I stayed in the loft, knees pulled up to my chest, listening to those sounds carve into Theodore's door. When morning came, the scratching stopped. I climbed down and checked the door, fresh gouges in the wood, deeper than the ones around the frame of the second door. That night, I pushed the kitchen table against the front door before sunset. The deadbolt was solid, but the table made me feel better. Didn't matter. She came back anyway. The scratching started around 11 p.m., Same deliberate scrapes, but now she was testing the door, too, pushing against it. The table scraped against the floor with each shove. "I saw you, Marcus," she called through the wood. "You looked at me. That means we're connected now." The second door started rattling, violent shaking that made the whole cabin groan. "My friends want to meet you too," she said. That's when I heard the voices from behind the second door. Not just rattling now. Actual voices. Muffled conversations in words I couldn't understand. Different languages, maybe, or something that just sounded like language. The voices got louder, more urgent, like they were arguing about something. "They're excited," the woman said from outside. "They've been waiting so long." I pushed the couch against the table, added the chairs on top, made a barricade 3 feet thick. Every night after that she came back. The scratching got deeper. The voices behind the second door got clearer, and I kept adding furniture to the pile. The rules weren't just protection anymore. They were the only thing keeping whatever was out there from getting in. And I'd already broken one. I woke up to nothing. No birds, no wind in the trees, no small animals rustling through the underbrush. Even the usual creaking of the cabin had stopped, like the whole world was holding its breath. I lay in the loft bed for maybe 10 minutes, waiting for something, anything. But the silence pressed against my ears until they started ringing. The feeder rule was clear. Only fill it when the birds sing in the morning. No birds singing meant no refilling. Simple enough. I climbed down and made coffee, but even the sound of water boiling seemed too loud. Wrong. Like I was breaking some kind of natural law just by existing. By noon, I was pacing. The silence had weight to it now, pushing down on the cabin roof, seeping through the walls. I kept catching myself holding my breath, then forcing myself to breathe normally. But normal didn't exist anymore. I tried reading, tried organizing the kitchen cabinets again, tried anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off the quiet. But my eyes kept drifting to the second door. It was just sitting there beside the fireplace. Same thin line where it met the wall, same lack of handle. But today it felt different, like it was waiting. I walked over and pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. But the silence on the other side felt deeper than the silence in the cabin. Older. My hand went to the frame, fingers tracing that thin vertical line. I pushed gently, then harder. Still nothing. But standing there, I could almost imagine what might be beyond it. A room, maybe, or a tunnel, or something else entirely. The urge hit me like hunger, sharp and insistent. I needed to know what was behind that door. Theodore's rules be damned. I spent the rest of the afternoon fighting it, made lunch I couldn't taste, cleaned the bathroom twice, rearranged the bookshelf. But every few minutes I'd find myself looking at the door again. By evening, the silence had become a living thing. It crawled under my skin and made my teeth ache. I kept glancing at the door, and each time the urge got stronger. Just a quick look, just to see what was there. Theodore was dead. The rules were just an old man's paranoia. What could it hurt? I was still arguing with myself when the storm clouds rolled in. They came fast, boiling up over the tree line like black smoke. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes, and the first rumble of thunder shook the cabin windows. I moved to the side window in the kitchen, watching the clouds swallow the last of the daylight. Lightning flickered inside them, turning everything white for split seconds before plunging it back into darkness. The rain started as a whisper, then built to a roar. Sheets of water hammered the roof and streamed down the windows. Lightning cracked overhead, close enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. That's when the pounding started. Heavy fists against the front door, urgent, desperate. "Hello?" A man's voice, barely audible over the storm. "Please, I'm lost. I need help." I pressed my back against the kitchen wall, Theodore's rule echoing in my head. Stay inside during night storms. Don't answer voices. Please, I can see the light. I know you're in there. The voice was closer now, right against the door. I've been walking for hours. I'm soaked through. The pounding continued, rhythmic, insistent. My car broke down on the main road. I followed the lights through the trees. Please, just let me wait out the storm. I squeezed my eyes shut. It sounded real, human, desperate. What if it was just some poor bastard who'd gotten turned around in the woods? But Theodore's warning was clear. Night storms, no matter what sounds I heard. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was just the rain and thunder. Then it started again, at the kitchen window. Tap, 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 gentle, almost polite. I opened my eyes and saw a shape pressed against the glass. A man's silhouette, dark against the lightning-lit rain. "I can see you," he said, voice muffled by the window. "Please, I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just need shelter." The tapping moved to the front window, then the bedroom window, then back to the front door. "Hello? Hello?" Multiple voices now, calling from different directions. "We're lost. We need help." I crept to the front window and peered through the gap in the curtains. Lightning flashed and I saw them. 3 figures standing in the clearing, maybe 4. Human shapes in the rain, but something was off about the way they stood. Too still, too straight. Another flash, and I could see their faces pressed against the front window. Pale, features smeared like wet paint. "Please let us in." The voice came from right in front of me, but it wasn't the man's voice anymore. It was mine. "We're so cold," they said in unison, using my voice. "We just want to get warm. We won't stay long." Lightning strobed again and again, and with each flash I could see more of them. 5 figures, 6, all pressed against the windows, their faces wrong in ways I couldn't name, eyes too wide, mouths that didn't move when they spoke. "We know you're scared," they said with my voice, "but we're just like you. We're lost too. We need help too." The words came from everywhere at once. Front window, side windows, the door. "Let us in, Marcus. Let us in, and we'll tell you what's behind the second door." I covered my ears and backed toward the loft ladder. The voices kept coming through the windows, through the walls, from everywhere at once. "Remember when you were 7 and broke Mom's favorite mug?" they said with my voice. "You hid the pieces under your bed for 3 days." I stopped climbing. I'd never told anyone about that mug. "Remember the time you cheated on your algebra test in 9th grade? Copied the answers from Jenny Martinez's paper?" My hands shook on the ladder rungs. "Jenny Martinez. I hadn't thought about her in 15 years. You cried in the bathroom after your first job interview. Thought you'd blown it completely." I scrambled up into the loft and pressed myself against the far wall. How could they know these things? I'd never written them down, never told anyone. "We know you, Marcus," they called up to me. "We know everything about you. The time you stole $5 from your dad's wallet, the lie you told about being sick to skip Sarah's wedding, the night you sat in your car for 2 hours, too scared to go into the job interview." Each memory hit like a punch. Private moments I'd buried, mistakes I'd never confessed. They recited my childhood fears, my teenage embarrassments, my adult failures. Things I'd done when I was completely alone. "Just unlock the door, Marcus. We understand you. We know your secrets and we don't judge. You'll be safe with us." The voices grew louder as the night went on. They told me about the time I'd wet myself in 2nd grade and blamed it on spilled water, about my first kiss behind the gymnasium, about the panic attack I'd had in college that I'd never told anyone about. "We're the only ones who really know you," they insisted. "Your family doesn't know these things. Your friends don't know, but we do. We accept you completely." I pulled my knees to my chest and tried to block them out, but they just got louder, more insistent. They knew about every shameful moment, every private thought, every time I'd failed or been afraid or done something I regretted. The storm raged around the cabin. Lightning lit up the loft through the small window, and I could see shadows moving across the glass. The voices never stopped. They promised understanding, acceptance, Safety. All I had to do was come down and unlock the door. I don't know how long I sat there with my hands over my ears. Hours, maybe. The voices kept digging up memories I'd tried to forget, speaking them back to me in my own voice like they'd been there for every moment of my life. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The storm cut off mid-thunder. The voices went silent. Even the wind died. I waited in the loft, listening to my own breathing. Nothing. No rain on the roof, no voices calling my name, no scratching at the door. Just complete silence. Gray light started filtering through the loft window. Dawn. I climbed down slowly, every board creaking under my feet. The cabin felt different. Empty. Like whatever had been pressing against it all night had just vanished. I walked to the front window and looked through the gap in the curtains. The clearing was empty. No figures, no white dress. Nothing but wet grass and my rental car sitting where I'd left it. But the windows. Every single window was covered in muddy handprints. Dozens of them, overlapping and smeared across the glass. Small hands, large hands, all pressed against the windows like they'd been trying to push their way through. I checked the other windows. Same thing. The kitchen window, the bedroom window, even the small loft window I could barely reach, all covered in muddy prints. But that was it. No footprints in the mud around the cabin, no other signs that anyone had been there, just the handprints on the glass, already starting to dry in the morning air. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the table, staring at the muddy prints on the front window. They looked almost like they'd been pressed from inside the glass, not outside. But that was impossible. The birds started singing around 8, a whole chorus of them calling to each other in the trees around the cabin. Normal forest sounds, normal morning. I grabbed the bag of birdseed and walked outside. The air hit my face like a blessing, clean and cool with the smell of wet earth and pine. Sunlight filtered through the trees, warming my skin. I stood there for a minute just breathing, feeling like I'd been holding my breath all night. The feeder was completely empty. I filled it with fresh seed, listening to the birds calling overhead. A blue jay landed on the edge before I'd even finished, then another. Within minutes, 5 or 6 birds were feeding like nothing had happened. I stayed outside longer than usual, just standing in the sunlight. The mud around the cabin showed no footprints except my own from previous days. The storm had washed everything clean except for those handprints on the windows. But as I stood there watching the birds, feeling the sun on my face, I knew I couldn't do this anymore. Whatever Theodore had been protecting me from was getting stronger. Each night brought something worse. First, the woman's voice, then the scratching, then the figures in the storm. They knew things about me they shouldn't know, private things, secret things, and I could feel my resolve weakening. Last night, I'd almost gone to the door, almost unlocked it just to make the voices stop. The rules were the only thing keeping those things out, and I was starting to crack. Each night they got more aggressive, more creative. They were learning how to get to me, how to wear me down. The woman had been just the beginning. Now they could copy my voice, dig up my memories, make me doubt everything. I couldn't trust myself to keep following the rules much longer, and if I broke them, if I let those things in, I had a feeling I wouldn't be writing about it afterward. I couldn't stay another night. That was clear enough. I threw my clothes into the duffel bag without folding them, grabbed my toiletries from the bathroom, and stuffed everything into the rental car. The whole process took maybe 15 minutes. I wasn't being careful about it. The cabin looked exactly like it had when I'd first walked in 3 weeks ago. Same dust on the furniture, same smell of old wood, and something organic I never could place. I left Theodore's letter on the wooden table where I'd found it, smoothed flat like it had been waiting for me. But I couldn't just walk away without leaving something behind. I found a pen in my duffel bag and tore a piece of paper from one of Theodore's old notebooks. My handwriting looked shaky compared to his careful script. To whoever finds this, follow the rules, all of them. Don't think you're smarter than they are. Don't think you can handle just one night without them. You can't. Emma Reed. I set the note next to Theodore's letter and stepped back. Maybe whoever came next would listen. Maybe they'd be smarter than me. The front door felt heavier when I pulled it shut behind me. I didn't lock it. Seemed pointless now. The rental car started on the first try, which felt like a small miracle after everything else. I backed out of the clearing and started down the dirt road, following the same route I'd taken to get here. Left at the lightning-struck pine, past the creek, around the massive boulder. I was maybe 50 yards down the road when I checked the rearview mirror. A pale figure stood in the cabin's doorway. Same white dress, same long dark hair, same wrong way of standing, like someone had posed a mannequin and walked away. She was just standing there, watching me drive away. In broad daylight. Middle of the afternoon with the sun shining through the trees. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. The dirt road curved and she disappeared from view, but I kept checking the mirror every few seconds. Nothing but trees and the road behind me. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tight enough to hurt. This wasn't supposed to happen during the day. The rules were about nighttime, sunset to sunrise. But there she was, standing in Theodore's doorway like she owned the place now. I'd broken something by looking at her that first night, weakened whatever Theodore had spent years keeping in place. The rules weren't just protection, they were a prison. Theodore hadn't been living in that cabin, he'd been standing guard, and I'd walked away from my post. The main highway appeared ahead, and I turned left toward Kalispell without slowing down. I needed distance, miles of it. The rental car's engine hummed steady and normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Not the woman in white, exactly. Something else. Something I'd let loose by breaking Theodore's careful system. I thought about other people who might find the cabin. Hikers, maybe. Or some family member I didn't know about who'd get a call from Patricia Hoffman about another inheritance. They'd walk into that clearing and find the front door unlocked, Theodore's letter on the table, and my warning note beside it. Would they listen? Would they follow the rules? Or would they do exactly what I'd done? Think they knew better? Think they could handle whatever was out there in the woods? The speedometer read 65 in a 55 zone, but I didn't slow down. I needed to get as far from that cabin as possible before dark, because I had a feeling that whatever I'd set free wasn't going to stay put in those woods. It knew my name now. It had my voice, my memories, and I'd just taught it that the rules could be broken. I made it back to Denver on a Thursday. Took me 2 days of driving with stops in Missoula and Billings, checking motel room locks twice before bed each night. The apartment felt smaller than I remembered. Same furniture, same view of the parking lot, but everything looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through glass. I kept Theodore's letter and the property deed in a manila folder on my kitchen counter. Don't know why. Maybe proof that it all happened. Maybe just habit. The first week back, I threw myself into work, caught up on emails, finished the Henderson project, even volunteered for overtime. Anything to keep my brain busy during daylight hours. My coworkers asked about my vacation. I told them Montana was nice, quiet, left it at that. But the nights were different. I'd be sitting on my couch, watching TV or reading, and I'd hear it. Faint at first, like wind, through a crack in the window, then clearer. Marcus. Always my name. Always that same woman's voice from the cabin, but thinner now. Distant, like a radio station you can barely tune in. The first time it happened, I checked every window in the apartment. All locked. Checked the hallway outside my door. Empty. Called the building manager about noise complaints. He said nobody else heard anything, but I heard it. Not every night. Maybe twice a week at first. Then more often. The voice would call my name from somewhere I couldn't place. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the bathroom. Sometimes from the bedroom closet. Once I swear it came from inside the refrigerator when I opened the door for a beer. I started sleeping with the TV on, Background noise helped, but didn't stop it completely. The voice would slip through during commercial breaks or when the volume dipped, always patient, always waiting. 3 weeks after I got back, I was making coffee before work when I heard it clear as day. "Marcus, I know you can hear me." I dropped the mug. It shattered on the kitchen tile, same way my mother's had when I was 7. Coffee spread across the floor in a dark puddle. The voice laughed, soft and pleased. "You remember that, don't you? Hiding the pieces under your bed. You were so scared." I grabbed paper towels and cleaned up the mess with shaking hands. The voice kept talking while I worked. "You can't run from us, Marcus. We're connected now. You looked at me. You let us in." I threw the broken pieces in the trash and left for work without finishing my coffee. But the voice followed me. In the car, between radio songs, at my desk during the quiet moments between phone calls, in the elevator when I was alone, always the same message. We're connected. You can't run. You let us in. A month passed, then 2. The voice became part of my routine, like traffic noise or the neighbor's dog barking. I learned to ignore it during the day, but at night when the apartment was quiet, it got stronger. And it wasn't just the woman anymore. Other voices joined in. The man who'd claimed to be lost during the storm. Children's voices, high and sweet. An old woman who spoke in whispers. They all knew my name. They all knew my secrets. They told me about the time I cheated on my taxes, about the lie I told my sister last Christmas, about the girl in college whose heart I broke because I was too scared to commit. Private things, shameful things, things I'd never told anyone, but they didn't sound angry or judgmental. They sounded understanding, sympathetic. "We all make mistakes, Marcus," the woman would say. "We all have secrets. That's what makes us human." Sometimes I almost answered, almost spoke back. The loneliness in my apartment felt heavier than the silence at the cabin ever had. At least there, I'd known what I was fighting against. Here, I was just fighting myself. 6 months after Montana, I was sitting at my kitchen table, paying bills, when I realized something that made my blood run cold. The voices weren't just calling my name anymore. They were learning. They knew my work schedule. They knew when I grocery shopped. They knew the name of the barista at the coffee place downstairs. They were picking up details from my daily life, adding them to whatever they'd taken from me at the cabin. "How was your meeting with Henderson today?" the woman asked one evening while I was watching the news. "You seemed frustrated." I hadn't told anyone about that meeting, hadn't even written about it, but somehow she knew. That's when I understood what Theodore had really been doing all those years. He hadn't just been following rules to keep something locked away. He'd been standing guard. The cabin was a prison, and he was the warden. And I'd walked away from the job. The voices were getting stronger because whatever was in those woods was learning to reach beyond them. The connection they'd made with me was like a bridge. Every day I stayed away. Every day the cabin sat empty. That bridge got a little more solid. I thought about going back, thought about it every day, but I couldn't. I wasn't strong enough to live the way Theodore had lived. Decades of isolation, following rules that made no sense to anyone else, keeping watch over something that would destroy you if you made one mistake. Theodore had died alone because of that responsibility. I wasn't going to do the same. But lying in bed at night, listening to voices that shouldn't exist, calling my name from places they couldn't be, I started to understand something else. Some inheritances don't come with a choice. Some family responsibilities find you whether you want them or not. The voices were proof that I'd already paid part of the price. Every night they got a little clearer, a little more real. Every conversation they overheard through whatever connection we shared made them a little more human. And if they were getting stronger, learning more about the world beyond those woods, then eventually they wouldn't need me anymore. They'd have enough knowledge, enough power to reach other people, people who had no idea what they were dealing with, people who didn't even know there were rules to follow. I kept the deed and Theodore's letter because they were evidence, proof that I'd inherited something terrible and walked away from it, proof that some family legacies are curses, not gifts. But mostly, I kept them because I knew this wasn't over. The voices calling my name in the dark were just the beginning. Theodore had spent his whole life keeping something contained, and I'd undone his work in 3 weeks. The dead sometimes leave the living with impossible choices. Theodore had chosen duty over happiness, isolation over connection, responsibility over freedom. I'd chosen survival over everything else. But sitting in my apartment, listening to voices that knew my secrets and watched my life from whatever dark place they inhabited, I was starting to realize that survival and escape weren't the same thing. Some inheritances follow you home, some prices get paid whether you agree to them or not, and some family burdens find a way to collect no matter how far you run.